This past year has been a whirlwind, from international conflicts to the worst wildfire season our country's ever seen. And we've been there, bringing you these stories, your stories, and in many ways, our stories too. Whether it's live on location overseas or back here at home, Global News teams have shared the experiences of so many of those who have been affected. And every year, we take a step back to give you some insight into the impact these stories have had on the journalists who cover them. This year, we're starting in the Middle East, where Global News teams have tirelessly been reporting on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Our coverage began on October 7th when Hamas launched the worst attack on Israel in half a century, killing 1,200 people and sparking months of fighting, devastation, and civilian deaths in Gaza. And a warning, some of the images you're about to see are disturbing.
Without warning, violence and chaos erupts in the Middle East.
At dawn local time, Hamas militants launched an unprecedented and large-scale surprise attack.
Gun battles continue tonight on Israeli territory after an attack that people here are now calling Israel's 9/11.
When we landed, we found a country that was absolutely terrified, in shock. The air raid sirens were constant.
The Iron Dome is doing its job. Just a ton of explosions happening all around us.
Then one Hamas rocket made it through.
I feel the most vulnerable I've ever felt in my life. When I was running away, it was like I felt like prey, running away from a predator.
One of the first people we spoke to was at that music festival where hundreds were murdered. And they just described some of the most horrific scenes I've ever heard about.
This small, tight-knit Israeli community of Kfar Aza was one of the first to be attacked by Hamas.
The October 7th attack really impacted almost every Israeli. It seemed like everybody had been personally affected.
Every day we were just overwhelmed by grief.
Her funeral was delayed by 30 minutes because the mourners couldn't be consoled.
I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like what Hamas did on October the 7th.
The entrance to the Thai workers' safe room in Kibbutz Nir Oz feels like a moment frozen in time. While Hamas militants went on a rampage, some of the workers sought refuge here, but instead they were slaughtered.
They didn't just invade Israel and kill people. There was a level of humiliation.
Every day we were hearing some of the most horrific stories I've ever heard. Things that you didn't think that humans were capable of doing to other humans.
Israel is used to fighting wars, but not like this one. 4 days after the deadliest attack in decades, Israel is preparing for a possible ground offensive in Gaza.
Gaza is under siege. Israeli rockets rained down on the Palestinian city, bringing death and destruction.
We were still, so caught up in the aftermath of this horrific attack in Israel, and then suddenly, are simultaneously turning our attention to the bombardment of Gaza.
Without asking or giving, you hear now there is bombing.
The ones that stick in your head are the ones where they're pulling kids out of the rubble and they're just covered in white dust.
The Israeli army has now advanced further into the enclave. Israel has given Palestinian civilians a choice: flee now or get trapped in the north, where violence has and will continue to escalate.
We connected with this Palestinian freelance journalist in Gaza named Aziz.
Aziz was our eyes and ears on the ground in Gaza.
Civilian defense is take off the fire.
And the images that he got, it just looked like the end of the world.
Another survival.
Aziz went from being the means of our coverage to being the subject of it.
I tried to evacuate my house, my children, my family, all of them like this. Please send this message to international community.
The bombing escalated, and he would send us these voice notes, these videos overnight, showing us, telling us what was happening, and it was harrowing.
Lights thrown by Israelis on the eastern of Gaza, eastern of Jabalia camp.
It was pitch dark.
As you listen now, they targeted something.
Here's footage the IDF says shows civilians walking south following the evacuation order.
Thankfully, Aziz and his family eventually got out.
Among those trapped in these scenes of carnage is Samir Saleh Al-Hams, a Canadian man who lost 5 members of his family.
I am asking my government, Canadian government, to take a responsibility to support, even if they are not supporting Palestinians, to support their own Canadian citizen.
Vivian Silver was somebody who lived for peace, and she walked the walk her whole life.
She organized this march in the West Bank in 2017, condemning an earlier Israeli attack on Gaza civilians.
Where we've been told that only war will bring peace, we don't believe that anymore.
This is what is left of Vivian Silver's house. I visited her home in Kibbutz Be'eri, and it was burned beyond recognition.
And in the end, she lost her life to the hatred she tried to stop.
Ghazi Hamed, a member of the political bureau of Hamas, spoke with our Crystal Gamansing in Beirut.
That was a tense moment. You just have to remind yourself, stay calm, stay calm. Taking the women and the children and the elderly, was that a mistake?
Look, I think this is not what our intention. It is not our intention to take civilians.
Despite those claims, more than 1,400 Israelis were killed in the October 7th attack.
And there was a lot of misinformation flying around this story. And I can tell you, having seen it with my own eyes, that Palestinians were shot in the West Bank. I can tell you, having talked to the victims' families, that civilians were killed on October the 7th, even though some people would tell you that they weren't.
You don't have to pick a side in this conflict to be sad about how people are going through it. This installation is called Lights of Hope. Standing in the middle, it's a little like being surrounded by bright candles and strands of light. But it is something to see as the sun goes down here in Jerusalem.
We begin with what is now a state of emergency in the Northwest Territories.
The sky was dark, it was orange, there was smoke, we saw large flames, and it's all along the one road in and the one road out.
The smell, just the anxiety in the air, it was, it was just incredible.
Well, there was an undeniable uneasiness in this northern city as fire steadily inches closer.
You know, it's kind of like a maelstrom of emotion. It was just so eerie. I kept thinking like, wow, this could get bad really fast.
The situation taking a turn for the worse here in Yellowknife tonight. The territory has decided to evacuate the entire city of Yellowknife and surrounding areas.
I had no idea that was going to happen. There's nowhere really to run and hide there up north.
That's one of the most frightening things about a wildfire, is that it can just be so unpredictable. And it can just change just like that.
It made me realize how big the situation was.
Very stressed. I've never been on a road trip with my son before. Yeah, it's scary.
The threat is real. I saw it for myself.
There was panic buying. People were rushing to get out.
People have been waiting for up to 5 hours, parked on their suitcases. Some brought lawn chairs, they have their pets, hoping and waiting to get on a plane. And soon.
I'm nervous, scared.
It scares the pants off me.
We're relying totally on the government to get them out. And the look of worry was something I won't forget, because it was a large crowd, but it was fairly quiet.
The most vulnerable and the less fortunate ones were the ones that were waiting in line, you know, with everything. You feel helpless in that situation. You're talking to them, and you're hearing the distress and the panic, the uncertainty.
Our Jamie Dahl was in Yellowknife today. She was talking to some of the last people in the city before she as well hit the road to Fort Providence like so many others.
When we were trying to evacuate, we didn't have gas. We had to find gas. That was one thing we were looking for. Another thing we were looking for was a power inverter, because our power inverter broke. Like, it was just one thing after another. and then you have to report on a story.
We ended up having to sleep, and we finally did evacuate in the basement of a hotel on cots because there was no room at the inn anywhere, and we were eating crackers and peanut butter right out of the jar for many, many days.
We were in there with, I think, 3 or 4 other people that needed a place to stay, and so yeah, we were an evacuee. We were part of the story, which I don't like being.
It was just extraordinarily challenging. You're trying to get, keep yourself safe, but also get the story. In large swaths of the north, there is no cellular connectivity, and in some cases that connectivity was eliminated by the wildfires. So we drove around with Starlink dishes.
This small, smoky town of Hay River is surrounded by fire on 2 sides.
We're getting a startling look at what the fire has left in its wake.
It's gone. There's nothing really to think about.
Residents say 95% of this hamlet is completely gone. They're now wondering, where was the help?
Losing everything you have, though, I can't imagine what that's like. I don't ever want to. I feel for them.
There's this resilience, there's this community spirit, and there's just this down-to-earth attitude. She and other volunteers are now cooking for about 200 frontliners.
They're sacrificing their lives.
To help keep them calm and their spirits up, 3 soldiers even pulled out guitars.
The generosity in spirit of people in the north never ceases to amaze me, and it was on full display.
Because what I saw was Mother Nature pretty angry.
And they're more frequent, and they are bigger, and they are more destructive. We're going to be covering a lot more wildfires, I think, in our future, unfortunately.
Honestly, when I first heard and saw the images, I really could not believe what I was seeing.
They got the call at 5:45 a.m., shortly before sunrise. Firefighters came upon towering flames, billowing pillars of smoke, people at the peak of desperation.
People were jumping out of the second-story windows. The firefighters had ladders against the building, trying to, save whoever they could.
Before dawn, more than 100 first responders mobilized to battle the 5-alarm blaze.
Initially, firefighters were saying a few people had been taken to hospital, 1 person was missing, but from there the news just got worse and worse.
With 7 people now confirmed missing, police say they haven't ruled out the possibility that more victims could be found in the ruins. Officials say there was confusion over how many people were inside the building initially because several apartments were Airbnb rentals. One of the people believed to be in the fire was photographer Camille Mailleux. A friend of hers showed up to the scene on Sunday, hoping to find closure.
I couldn't believe that. It's just so sad.
That was heartbreaking.
It was a gut-wrenching scene. Friends and family of some of the missing gathered in front of the building. Their loved ones were likely lost. One of them appears to be 18-year-old Charlie Lacroix. The family was told she called 911 during the fire twice because she couldn't escape. Her grandfather says she was in a room without windows and was begging for someone to come and get her.
We got our hands on a photo of an Airbnb in the building with no windows, which is illegal and also just a nightmare scenario in a fire.
People couldn't get out. They couldn't find an exit door. They couldn't find windows that opened.
Yukun Zheng rushed to Montreal from Boston when he heard the news.
She actually come here for a conference, for a neuroscience conference.
I remember meeting Yukun Zheng. He was mad that police and firefighters weren't saying much. His friend An Wu had been inside. I felt so bad for him. He was furious that they weren't going in to search for her, but there was basically nothing left in there. Crews really couldn't get in right away because it was super unsafe.
The police would be on one side. We'd be questioning them. Well, family members were right behind us, just waiting to hear those answers.
Eventually, we'd find out that 7 people died in the fire, and that was just devastating, honestly.
I feel guilty for being alive, but also grateful.
Carling Siwi says she feels lucky to be alive after she survived a deadly fire in Old Montreal.
Sitting down with her was a little surreal, trying to have a delicate conversation, trying to, ask her questions almost as if she's talking to a friend. 6 of the 7 people who died were renting Airbnbs that were illegal. And so that spurred a whole conversation with Quebec and the Quebec government on its regulations about Airbnbs.
The fines they face if illegal listings are found, up to $100,000.
The mayor of Montreal was grilled about, how often do buildings like this get inspected.
The tragic fire in Old Montreal that killed 7 people has sparked change at the Montreal Fire Department.
The owner has filed a lawsuit against the city. There are lawsuits from the victims' families. It'll probably be years before they all go through the court system.
A few months later, the police reveal their investigation into the fire is now a criminal investigation. It's like someone did this on purpose?
I walked by the building not too long ago, and it's still in its, dilapidated state.
Everyone wants to know what happened and why. But most of all, you think of the families of the people killed. They're just waiting, hoping to get some answers, some closure. But it might take a long time.
Breaking news sending shockwaves across the city and beyond. Toronto Mayor John Tory has resigned.
I was actually at a family get-together. My partner's family had a birthday, and I got a tip that this was coming down the pipe.
We're hearing that the mayor is going to give a pretty surprising and dramatic press conference in the next hour and a half.
Friday nights on the assignment desk are generally pretty quiet.
Most of the time when bad news is going to break that a company doesn't want to talk about on Monday, they do it after 5 o'clock. So here it is, after 5 o'clock on a Friday.
Friday nights is a time when we don't have nearly as many staff in the newsroom or out in the field.
Everybody knew something big was going to happen.
We knew that the mayor was going to talk at around 8:45.
Well, good evening and thank you for coming.
Beyond that, we didn't know what to expect.
I want to update Torontonians on a difficult personal matter.
No one from the mayor's office was telling us exactly what it was about. Watched, sure enough, there came then Mayor John Tory come out, admit to what no one really ever expected him to.
During the pandemic, I developed a relationship with an employee in my office in a way that did not meet the standards to which I hold myself as mayor.
It was pretty quickly all hands on deck.
He was the city's mayor during COVID. He was very stable. He was very predictable.
Permitting this relationship to develop was a serious error in judgment on my part.
That was not predictable. It was not predictable that he would make this bombshell announcement.
As a result, I've decided that I will step down as mayor.
And would decide to quit on the basis of what he had done.
It was a big surprise that this was something you would not expect the mayor to admit to having an extramarital relationship, especially someone like John Tory. He was going to be resigning. He gave us no timeline.
I came in on Saturday to do the story, and somebody says, hey, John Tory's in the area just outside the front doors. Do you mind if we ask you one question?
No questions today, sorry.
He was coming in.
No questions.
Didn't have much to say, but he didn't run away. We saw him during COVID give very expansive press conferences, never seemed to avoid a question, would never give a short answer. So he was polite, he was cordial, but he didn't have anything to say.
You talk about the worst possible time for something like this to happen. Friday was when he announced this. Wednesday was City Council's budget meeting. They had to pass a lot of things. This is one of the most involved City Council meetings of the year.
So I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
The meeting got disrupted several times. There were a lot of protests. They kept clearing out the chambers as people would cause a bit of an uproar and protest. Don't touch me. There were concerns about police budgets and a number of other things and the direction that the city was going in. So it was a meeting that didn't wrap up until late into the evening when that vote finally concluded. About 10:30, we were all waiting outside his office, and a member of his staff came out and gave us this letter of resignation, which was given to the city clerk and really laid out the next steps of how it would actually go. So it would be that Friday that he would be gone.
On that final day, somebody decides that they're going to throw an egg at the window. Maybe that's a reflection of how some people felt. But to John Tory's credit, he didn't hide. He could have drawn the curtains. For whatever reason, he decided he wanted to be seen at his desk doing his job.
We pulled people away from family dinners, from personal weekends, from plans that they had and they did not expect to be working. But when a story of this magnitude breaks,
I'm usually known for taking as many questions as you want to ask.
You're just reminded that people who work in the news industry work in this industry because they can't say no to a good story.
But on this occasion, I think I'll let my statement speak for itself. Thank you.
Thank you. And this was a very, very impactful story.
Well, there you have it, a look behind the scenes at some of the stories of this past year. And now we leave you with a look at dazzling Christmas light displays across Canada. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our entire global news team here, we want to wish you the happiest holiday.